Hey everyone, I am now starting a fantasy campaign using Savage Worlds. Now that's unusual for me. I don't run a lot of fantasy campaigns anymore. So I was pretty excited when the players said, hey, let's do a fantasy campaign. So I wanted to spend a little time talking about the campaign, talking about how I'm using Savage Worlds with it, and hopefully you get something out of it. Hey everyone, it's Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. We'd love your support. We'd love you to send emails or comments, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I would love to see some comments on this video specifically. How do you run a fantasy game in Savage Worlds? What were some of the cool ideas you had in yours? And maybe I can learn from you and we can learn from each other. So I just finished a campaign. It was a science fiction campaign. Before that was another science fiction campaign. Before that was players working more in a post-apocalyptic world. So now finally I'm getting back to doing a fantasy campaign in Savage Worlds. So what did that mean? Well, first thing I did is I sourced the table a little bit with my players and say, what kind of fantasy game are they looking for? Are they looking for something unusual? Are they looking for something kind of bog standard D&D style stuff? Are they looking for something else? And they were like, hey, whatever you want to do is cool with us because we know you do high concept stuff. Basically, or I define a concept and then I kind of build around that and let the players kind of make the world flesh it out. I just start with the concept, what's going on behind the scenes. So I said, okay, I can do that. But what's the feeling do you want? Do you want it to feel more like a D&D kind of game? And the answer was yes. So that kind of led to how we choose the way we do fantasy in Savage Worlds. There's two primary ways, right? There's the Savage Worlds Pathfinder edition, which provides a very, Pathfinder D&D-esque kind of experience. It adds things called class edges, which provide edges that are very class-like, thus the name, and allow you to have really a class-like flavor with special things that only your class can do, or edges your class can get as it progresses. So that's pretty cool. And that added in an additional book called the Advanced Player's Guide, which added more class edges and more edges and other information. So that's a great option. The second option is the Fantasy Companion. And the Fantasy Companion is really great for kind of doing your own thing. You're rolling it all from scratch because it feels a lot more like a toolkit than a specific kind of way of playing. You can take advantage of that. It's more standard Savage Worlds in a sense. There's not like class edges, but obviously you can build any class you want by taking edges in Savage Worlds. And some of the edges in the Fantasy Companion feel like they came from Savage Pathfinder, which came first. But anyway, so there's two ways to approach it. And Eric and I actually did a video on the differences between the Fantasy Companion and Savage Pathfinder. So we have that video if you really want to dig more into what's the differences between the two. But for what my players were looking for, the obvious choice to me was going with Savage Pathfinder. That class edge system, having things that feel like classes, I think were really appealing to them so that they get that more D&D feel. So it was like, hey, this seems like the right answer. Plus, it played into my concept. So my campaign concept that I came up with was the gods are missing, and they were missing, a millennia ago. So 1,000 years ago, the gods went missing, which caused a catastrophic failure in civilization. Cities that were humongous cities with millions of inhabitants all fell as people, and they scattered to the wind. Kind of like the Mayan Empire, where there was something that just kind of made the whole thing collapse under its own weight. And in this case, it was the loss of the gods. And so now 1,000 years later, there's still kind of pockets of civilization. Some of them aren't really connected with others, and that's where the players come in. They're going to be in a part of the world which really isn't connected with the rest of the world because it's separated by sort of this dense forest that's dangerous and people just don't travel through it. And so they're somewhat isolated. And so then I got back and I sourced the table again. I said, tell me something about, there's going to be 4 major towns, hard to call them cities because they're not that big, but there's these 4 major towns that are scattered along this coastline over like 800 miles. So there's a long travel time between the two. It could take a week to get between 2 different cities. What does that look like? And it was cool because the players came out and they were the ones that said, well, yeah, I totally get that the gods are gone. We don't know what caused that. They just disappeared, and bad things happen. So one of my players said, I think exploring why that is would be cool. So are there lesser gods that still provide some of the powers that we used to have? And then maybe there's a temple in each one of these little cities to this lesser god who can't do everything that the greater gods could, but you still have gods. And the answer was, yeah, of course, we can certainly do that. Have lesser gods who can still provide some of that faith-based capability, but there's not really clerics anymore. The clerics like you would think in classic D&D. This is where the advanced player's guide came into handy, because there is in that something called an oracle. An oracle feels, the way they get their power from the deity is a much different feel than your classic cleric. And so it's pretty cool, because you have, these huge disadvantages, like, and like the player I had, one of his negatives is, he senses he can sense when there's undead around, but it also causes him a lot of grief and distress. So he has these powers kind of innate, but he can't do as much as the cleric can do. He can still heal and that sort of thing. But in my world right now, things like resurrection aren't really available because that's too high of power. Things like divination spells are far and few between as far as player characters go, because it was the gods that would provide that information. So it was pretty cool. I think it's really important, and people talk about session 0 all the time. Well, this was kind of a session -1 in a sense, to try to get the players' input on the world and what they think the world would look like. And it also led to some very interesting stuff, because one of the players' background concepts is they wanted to be part of an organization that was somewhat like a police force, but wasn't, because these city-states are city-states, and so they don't have a centralized government. Maybe these are kind of like ranger-type people, and he called them wardens. And so this warden concept became part of the world, and I immediately said, oh, that's now a great way of bringing quests to the players, a great way to bring that character's concept into play. Another player said, well, now that I know that the gods, he wants to be the oracle, he says, now that I know the gods are gone, part of my character concept is I'm searching for the gods and trying to figure out what happened to them. And I've gone, temple delving and discovered lore about them. And so his occult score was aligned with that. So pretty cool. And then I had some players who were going to do elves, an elf bard, basically. And then we had a minotaur, because one of my players loves minotaurs, playing a minotaur barbarian. And they all, through various machinations, have come together and work as a small little group. And it took a couple of sessions to get them all met together and have a reason for them to adventure. Thank you, the wardens, for providing this quest, this initial quest. So one of the things I always do when I'm thinking of a world, and so I had this really great concept, and I hope the players, if you're watching, now you absolutely just must stop, no watching. Because the gods, as I was figuring out where the gods had gone, the concept's not just that the gods are missing. The concept is they were trapped, and they were trapped by dragons who have basically disappeared from the memory of people over a millennia. That, dragons, they're fantasy, they never existed. And that's something the players can gradually start learning, that these things are real, that these things were in conflict with the gods, and, start building out some of that information. So again, it's kind of, reminiscent. It's not like it's a completely unique idea that I came up with. Obviously, you had things like Dragonlance, where the gods abandoned because of, the people not worshiping the right way, if you want to say it that way. So it's not completely unique, but I think the whole purpose of going through that exercise is what kind of adventures can I create to make this an actual useful concept. In one of my previous videos about a campaign, I talked about that. It's like one of the important things when you're doing this campaign concept is you don't have to have like 15 adventures written, but you should be able to kind of articulate what kinds of things, what kind of adventures would the players be doing in this world. And so the first one obviously is, there can be an adventure where they're discovered a ancient temple, and that ancient temple has ancient evil in it now that's starting to grow as the, since there's not the gods to keep the dark forces in bay, because the dark forces aren't necessarily just evil, because there's an evil god, there's a good god. They're just powers that are now running unchecked. I think I probably will make it. I'm leaning now as we've run a couple of sessions that maybe the evil god has finally struck a bargain or something with the dragons to allow him to become more. I don't know. I guess it's going to depend on how the players, with the things they do, the directions they go, and how this all pans out. This concept and what really is there. So I looked at that as a potential adventure. Then there was things where they're living in the wilderness, so there's creatures in the wilderness, attacking. Like there could be large creatures like trolls who are now attacking villages. Easy stuff to do. And it all started tying into, well, why are the trolls attacking villages? Why are these giant cats? Why are owlbears out in force? Well, it's now this new force, this new undead force or evil pushing less evil creatures who are just, inhabitants of this woods out and pushing them into where they used to not interact with the civilization all that much. So I thought that was kind of a cool way of setting it up, starting it. So that's kind of the concept. And we sat down and we understood what we were trying to accomplish and knew that Savage Worlds could offer that by going with the Savage Pathfinder. Also, it's one book. If you got the Advanced Player's Guide, it's $2, so it's no difference than Suede and Fantasy Companion there. But it was kind of nice to say, well, here's a set of rules. My players have played Savage Worlds for a while, but it's still, it's everything in this book is what we're going to be playing. It was cool that there's a nice bestiary as part of the Pathfinder set of books. So I thought that was a great thing. So that's kind of what I'm running now, a fantasy companion or a fantasy campaign. And I'm hoping that old spirit and vibe that I had years ago when I ran tons of fantasy like everyone else, that I can still get there and I don't get hung up on the high concept and, trying to and embrace the magic and the crazy. Cause when I'm doing like my post-apocalyptic game, it still was somewhat based on reality and, there's nanobots, but those nanobots work in a certain way and it's all kind of consistent with the way you think. And well, now fantasy can just throw that out the window because you just got magic and magical creatures and things with arcane resistance, and there's things that can't be hit with anything but a magical weapon. So there's all sorts of stuff that I have to get my head wrapped around again. So maybe that's it. If you basically ran science fiction and you went back to fantasy, what did you do to get your head back wrapped around what happens in fantasy? So anyway, just thought I'd talk a little bit about my new campaign, Source and a Table, and what we're using in Savage Worlds. So I'm Carl again with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. We'd love your support, likes, subscribes, all that good stuff. And you can catch a podcast that we make. Eric's on it with me, as well as James, a professional DM, called Mastering the RPG. And hopefully you like that as well. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.
It's a savage world, strange as a weird war. It's a savage world, classics to explore. It's a savage world.